All right, sounds good. Let's begin.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon LA 2020. Welcome to the Business Intelligence Reporting and Use Cases track. And soon we'll be listening to the How to Leverage Marketing Analytics to Source Better Talent session with Harrison Tang. I am Ozzy Tarula, your host, and our co-host today is Michelle Ifiola. We will be moderating the chat and Q&A using WOVA for you during this session. Today we have our guest, Harrison Tang, and he will be talking about how to leverage marketing analytics to source better talent. Harrison is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Spokeo. He started Spokeo with his college roommate Mikey Daly and Eric Leon in 2006 in his parents' basement, and serves as Spokeo's Chief Executive Officer. Harrison guides Spokeo's product vision to build an experienced team that helps the company realize its mission of making the world around us more transparent. Under his leadership, Harrison has helped build and scale Spokeo's user base from zero to serving tens of millions of users. He is passionate about building products that help customers get their jobs done. Harrison earned a BAS degree in electrical engineering and economics and an NMS degree in electrical engineering at Stanford University. Without further ado, I'll hand this over to the speaker. Thanks for being here, Harrison.
Thank you. Thank you for a great introduction. And thank you for having me to the DataCon LA. Very excited to be here. Today, just want to talk about talent analytics, how to leverage marketing analytics to source better talent. So that if you're looking for a job or something like that, this is a great talk because you want to know the game plan, right? If you know how the companies hire people and how the game is played, it's easier to beat the game, right? Now, if you're a company and looking to build up talent analytics capabilities, I think this is even a better place. I'm going to go into details about how talent analytics starts at Spokeo, what it looks like today, and then I also will share what's in the roadmap into the future. So without further ado, let's start right away because it's a big topic, and feel free to ask any questions because some of you guys have different levels of experience with data science and data analytics. So feel free to ask any questions you have, and that will help me kind of adjust the presentation accordingly. So let's start with answering the question, what is talent analytics? We're a data company, so we really care about definitions. So talent analytics is defined as data analytics on talent management, right? Basically using data to understand how people work and change how companies are managed. In marketing lifecycle management, usually talent pipeline, customer pipeline is divided into acquisition and retention. Same thing with talent management, right? Talent acquisition is how to attract more and stronger talents at lower cost. And retention is about how do you retain existing talent and help grow their careers. Now, I'm going to introduce a different dimension. And I think the best analogy I can use is micro and macro economics, right? So micro analytics is talking about how do we assess someone, an individual's strengths, weaknesses, and performance. On the macro level, it's about analytics on operations and pipelines, right, and process. Like, is your process very robust? How's your pipeline and things like that? So it's a 2x2 matrix, orthogonal space, right? A Cartesian space. So there's 4 possibilities, and I'm going to go into the high level of what these different areas are all about. So why is it important? I think more than the question of what, we need to really address the why. And talent, as you know, is the most valuable asset of the company. So talent is oftentimes the top 2. Like if you don't have inventories, it's oftentimes the top 2 costs for any single company. If you are e-commerce and you carry inventories and things like that, it's still top 3. So it is very, very expensive. All right. Now, everyone knows it's valuable, but this is the funny thing, is that from my experience, people don't put money where the mouth is, okay? They spend all the money into marketing technologies, trying to do a Pareto MPD on like lifetime values and then debating which algorithm is better. But then when you're talking about talent lifetime value, they don't even know what that means, you know. And when they're doing talent analytics, they're still using very basic tables and not even pivot tables and things like that. So that's needs to change, right? If talent is that important, it's very expensive. Usually cost per hire is about $20,000 to $30,000, right? It's very, very expensive, right? It's getting more expensive. Then I think company needs to invest more and putting the money where the mouth is, right? And of course, since COVID in March, talents will become increasingly remote. Without all the in-person signals, right, interactions, data-driven management is going to become more and more important, and talent analytics can help. So these are the questions that analytics can help answer, right? So I often, as a CEO, I often get this question, hey, should we hire this recruiting agency? Or should we go to this university's recruiting event? And prior to having talent analytics, to be very frank, the decision process is quite nebulous at best, okay? But if you actually know your cost per application is $100, and you do expect and are comfortable to receive 100 applications at the event, then why aren't you willing to pay $10,000 for a recruiting event? Now, if you don't even know what your cost per application is, then yes, the decision process is going to be very, very hard. So I think the analytics is going to help a lot of these nebulous questions, right? Seemingly hard questions a lot easier. Once you have these metrics where there's cost per hire, time to hire, and all that stuff, breaking down on different segments, right? All these questions are going to be a lot easier. Now, I do want to talk about a fundamental belief that Spokeo has in regards to talent. People have this, often associate talent analytics with some cold-hearted numbers thing or whatever. That's not what this is about, right? It's not about trying to be cutthroat about certain decisions. It's not about trying to find the perfect A+ talent. That's not what it's about. It's actually about helping build a more rounded team. It's recognizing that all of us have strengths and weaknesses. And how do we assemble a team that complete, right? That complements our weaknesses, right? And enhance our strength that completes the circle. And the belief is that the more rounded team performs better. And actually there's a Google study around this, and you can just go to Google it. You can actually just Google it and look at that, that study about how a rounded team in a psychological safe environment performs better. All right, so how do we build talent analytics? So first of all, very, very quick, Spokeo, if you haven't heard, is a leading people search engine, people intelligence service that helps over 15 million users a month to search and connect with others. Our mission is to make the world around us more transparent, and we have a very data-focused culture. So how we build talent analytics is actually not through a book or something, okay? The genesis of our talent analytics at Spokeo is actually, I come from a marketing background, and I was looking at these LTV, CPAs, and all these segmentation and all these cutting edge marketing technologies. And then I look at the recruiting team's report and was like, the talent technologies has a lot of room for improvement. And I think maybe some of the philosophies in marketing analytics and marketing technology can be applied in talent. And that's actually how it all came about. So I didn't read some books or something like that. It's really built from grounds up with our data-focused culture. And what is a data-focused culture? A data-focused culture, unlike the hacker culture, like some companies are located on one hacker way, it's opposite of that, okay? So data-focused culture is about recognizing that garbage in, garbage out, recognizing that the beginning is the most important part. So this is our Spokeo data process. The most important part is actually the raw layer, right? Understanding, profiling, and making sure that the raw data coming in is the best there is. And then, later on, you'll start adding more transformations, determine what data should be updated as prime, map, and standardized to a standardized schema, link the data together into entities, whether in Spokeo context, that will be person, address, email, and so on and so on. MAR is basically segments, right, and presentation, and so on and so on. And that's the Spokeo data process. And that's a manifest of the data-focused culture. And we apply this process to everything, okay, including our core values. A lot of times, how we come up with core values is the CEO, wake up one day, putting these values on a piece of paper and say, hey, here's the decree. That's actually not how it works at Spokeo. We actually collect raw inputs from stakeholders and old teammates, calibrate definitions using Google dictionaries and Oxford dictionaries, map it, group it through synonyms and so on, to come up with our core values. And same thing with talent analytics. You need to identify where, what, and how to collect the data. Are you using an ATS? ATS stands for Application Tracking System, right? Are you using an HRIS and so on and so on? If you are, what data do they collect? Right? Do you send out pulse surveys to your teammates? Can those data be collected and so on and so on? Got to calibrate the definition of meanings, right? Meanings of different things. In marketing, the definition of conversion is quite important, right? Is conversion the collection of payment information? Or is conversion just email registration? Or is conversion not just the collection of payment event, but the completion of the payment event, meaning that you actually receive a payment, right? There's actually quite a bit of difference here. The same thing in talent analytics. What is the definition of hire? Is definition of hire means someone actually joined the company? Or is it because is it when the offer is extended? Or when the offer is accepted and so on and so on? At Spokeo, we define hire as offer accepted. And in an unfortunate situation where someone accepts the offer but still doesn't come, and by the way, that happens, kind of jackass things to do, but that actually happens. We calculate it as kind of like a refund and chargeback, right? We have some kind of metrics for that. So definition of hire is actually very, very important. It's actually quite deep. It actually took us a while to actually align everyone on the definition, right? Got to map and link different data from different systems. Segments are very important. Is it apply or source, engineers or non-engineer, and how do you present that on a regular basis? How do you automate that process? So it all starts with a data-focused thinking and data-focused culture. Now, let's dive right into micro analytics. How do we assess an individual's strengths, weaknesses, and performance? At Spokeo, we use a pretty well-known organization called DDI. I think it's called Development Dimension International. They've been around for decades. And they actually dimensionalize a person, a talent, into 4 dimensions. Knowledge, which is about what you know. Experience, what you have done. Competency, what you can do. And lastly, personal attributes. So we use this kind of model, if you will, and we go deeper into it. For knowledge, we further segment it by mapping it to LinkedIn skills data. Right? So essentially, when we are looking at a job rec or candidate, when we're writing a job rec, we actually find all the related job recs, get the skills data from LinkedIn, and we actually cluster them into like about 5 or 8 skills clusters, right, and dimensions. And we actually organize our interview panels according to those clusters. So if one of the clusters is, let's say, if the example is data engineer, so if the one of the clusters data warehousing, will have the data warehousing experts in the company chairing that panel. And usually there's about 5 to 8 clusters and panels. Right? We write our job descriptions, requirements this way too, mapping into the skills cluster. Because at the end of the day, titles are rigid, but people aren't. Okay. Product managers, let's use another example. There's many different kind of product managers. Okay. There is technical product manager, there's customer focused product manager, there's business ones, there's analytical, right? There's data product managers. So being very, very rigid about titles, using data warehouse thinking, using a hierarchical model, in my opinion, is quite yesterday, right? The new model is a network model, kind of like tags, and recognizing that everyone is different. So how do we actually subdimensionalize like a person, right, into thousands of little attributes, and then actually so allowing us to assess and more objectively assess where someone's strengths and weaknesses. So that's basically what we do, and we use LinkedIn talent, LinkedIn skills data for this. Competency is about experiences, and here we map to the core values, and we have certain questions that help us assess how does this candidate aligns with our core values. Experience maps to basically what you've done, right? And at Spokeo, we use OKR and SMART goals and methodologies for documenting experience, whether it's the job expectations or performance reviews. And OKR stands for object and key results, and SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time bound. You can look it up. And we actually document all of this with the Trackstar as our performance management tool. And lastly, personal attributes. Some companies actually use personal trait models. I think the most well-known one is called Myers-Briggs. To actually, they actually do ask these questions during the interview process. Spokeo does not do that. We recognize that this is one of the dimensions using the DDI success profile model, but and we actually do use a trait model called Hexagon. It's actually the most cutting edge personality model, right? To actually define our brand personality, but we actually do not use this during our interview process or performance management at this moment, because it is a little bit controversial. And I can go into that details if you are curious why it's controversial. But ultimately,
sorry, I was definitely curious.
Okay, so personality trait models is actually sounds very good in theory, but the biggest problem is basically, I think they call it factor analysis. It's basically how do you evaluate the person's dimensions, okay? The evaluation is not consistent. In other words, you take a Myers-Briggs test today, and you take it 6 months later or a year later, oftentimes the results are different. So even though you're the same person, okay, but taking it in a different time frame or different situations, your results are not consistent. And that really defeats the purpose of a personality trait model. So it sounds good in theory, and I think it actually has its scientific background, but I think what breaks down is the evaluation process. And I think technically it's called factor analysis, but I might be wrong about that. So you can look it up on Wikipedia. But that's the main problem with it. All right, so going back to this. So the whole thing is, hey, how do we create a spider web? How do we dimensionalize a person, right? I've talked about 4 main dimensions using DDI success profile. And actually those 4 dimensions can be subdivided into, in the case of knowledge, into thousands of subdimensions. So how do you create this spider web, right? And then how do we actually evaluate a talent, right? And recognizing that no one is going to complete the circle. So the goal of what we are trying to do in regards to micro talent analytics is to find a group of people who can actually round out the circle. That is why we're doing this. All right, let's jump to macro analytics. I think I have 10 minutes, so I'll try to go over the overview and I'll leave the last 5 to 10 minutes for your questions. So as I mentioned, on the macro side, it's about process and operations, right? And life cycle can be divided into acquisition and retention. On the acquisition part, the top KPIs are cost per hire, cost per application, time to hire. Cost per hire, generally you're talking about $20,000 to $30,000, right? Cost per application is about 100 to 150. So it's not cheap. You know, it's more expensive than most consumer services. I'll just tell you that. Now, the time to hire is very interesting. I recently had this discussion, and this actually just want to share this little story talking about analytics is a continuously improvement process, right? So the typical time to hire metrics is using averages. But the problem with averages is susceptible to outliers. So later on, we moved to median, which is 50th percentile. But then that still has a problem is that, for example, if I'm a hiring manager, you tell me your 50th percentile is 90 days. I was like, okay, whatever, you know, that really just blew through my head. So we're actually moving toward what's called a service model. And service model, essentially service level model. And what that is a percentile concept, right? What percentile or what percentage of time will you be able to provide a good service? And you have to define what a good service means. So in this example, it can be hiring within 90 days, right? And then if we can guarantee that 90% of the time we'll hire someone, right? Hire someone within 90 days, as a hiring manager, it gives me quite a bit of confidence. So we are moving and transforming typical time to hire metrics from something that's just a number to something that's actually very actionable for hiring managers. So that's just a little anecdote, a story about how analytics is not just a one-time thing. It's actually a continuously improvement. And using Spokeo terminology, one of our core values insists on quality is actually the continuous improvement and the concept of control in Six Sigma. Segments are very important, right? As we know in marketing, this is actually my favorite marketing model, by the way. It's called STP Model. It stands for segment, target, and position. Segment is basically identifying, analyzing, grouping customers. Right? In segments, you know, in talent context, it can be applied on pay, referral, agency, so on and so on. It can be segmented by roles, engineering, customer care, non-engineering, product. It can segment by seniority. There's a lot of segments. So you have to stack rank and prioritize which segment you're going to focus on first. And that's called target. And lastly, and this is actually the hardest part, right? Is once you identify what segment you want to focus on first, how do you build competitive advantage in consumers' minds? And that's called positioning. And for Spokeo, our positioning is where data meets the web. We're not just a data company. We can make data more beautiful, which we call beautiful data, right? And we're not just a web company that build user experiences. We actually know how data comes about. So funnel efficiency, that's also another very important thing to look at, right? In talent analytics, in the macro level, quantitative metrics will include, hey, how many hires do you have? How many applicants? What's the number of sourcing? Did your recruiter actually send out linking messages, right? How many linking messages sent? Qualitative metrics are also very, very important too, right? You gotta make sure that these are not spams, right? And these actually lead to high quality. So these are kind of control concept in operational management. And at Spokeo, we define quality rating as offers extended divided by hiring management screens. And obviously we have multiple funnel stage conversion rates. And by the way, these are all real numbers. So don't share it too much. All right, talent retention. That's not, acquisition is important, but that's not forget that retention is even more important, right? And the top KPIs, generally speaking, is tenure. In the industry, in Silicon Valley, I heard the tenure is about 1.5 years, right? Some companies as low as 1.2 and something like that. At Spokeo, and actually in LA, I know it's a little bit higher. For us, it's 3.1. Is that good or bad? Numbers without context are completely useless in my mind, right? Now, if you're 1.2 years, but let's say a big Fortune 500 company is like 6 months, then 1.2 years is great, right? So who's to say 1.2 is good or bad? In our opinion, we aspire to be a learning institution, and for some reason, for thousands of years, learning institutions use 4 years, right, as a stage of growth. So with that, that's our goal. So that means that 3.1 still have rooms to grow. Lifetime value is a very important concept in marketing. Unit economics. If you don't know the lifetime value, how do you know the cost per acquisition? If you don't have the cost per acquisition, how do you allocate marketing budgets? Same thing, right? What's the talent's lifetime value? What's the employer net promoter score? So these are all very, very important questions, and they are all solvable. And all these data can be used to build a career ladder to help and share and lay out what's company's idea on individual teammates' career growth, right? We build out all these things using LinkedIn skills data, and we actually benchmark the data to Redford, which is the Rolls Royce of compensation studies. And then we layer on top Glassdoor, Indeed, and other industry data to build this out. And there's more to do. On the data integration side, one of our key initiatives for the next year or two is diversity, right? How do we have more women engineers? And that's a very, very important question. And to affect that, we need to understand, for example, obviously we know how many women engineers in the company, but how many women applicants do we get, right? So we don't know that yet because we still need to layer demographics data on top of our ATS data and so on and so on. Product data also very important, right? Product data, if someone is not committing that much code, right? Or if someone's code is not passing the code climate score or something like that, maybe that person had checked out, right? And maybe that helps you predict how likely is this person going to leave, right? So to do those kind of modeling, you need this kind of data. We don't have it yet. Skills and the experience data, survey data from SurveyMonkey, data governance obviously is very important because this kind of data is very, very sensitive. Data automation, right? So how do you, a lot of these still at Spokeo is a kind of a manual tasks. So how do we automate it so that our teammates can spend more time on higher value projects? Same thing with analytics, predictive analytics. Can we predict how likely this person is going to stay or how likely this person is going to leave, right? Maybe it crosses a certain threshold, it sends a notification. And by the way, this is not pipe dream. There actually are studies that you can Google them on companies, right? Big Fortune 500 companies doing this kind of things on talent retention. Likely to hire, advanced talent LTV calculations, and so on and so on, right? Predictive analytics, succession planning, team building recommendations, and so on. So there's a lot of things to do, and it is a very important thing because, as I mentioned, talent is one of the most important assets of the company. And I don't feel that the industry, the tech industry in general, has put enough emphasis on it. And I think the purpose of this presentation is to really call out and making sure that all of us really do what we said, right? So very, very quick. we have about 9 minutes for people's questions, just to plug in Spokeo very, very fast, right? So we started in 2006, gone through quite a bit, started with as a social network aggregator, and then now pivoted to people search engine in 2010. And now we're going to try to answer the question of who are we, especially in today's digital world, basically, and the idea of an identity. And we're looking to hire a lot of people, especially on the data side. And you can just go to spokeo.com/careers to look at all the openings, or you can just email me at harrison@spokeo.com if you're interested to join us, or if you know someone interested to join us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. Very good presentation. I do have a couple questions. What is your hiring process like? How do you make a balance, between this data that you presented and then just a natural spirit of welcoming someone, the trust factor that you can't really put data behind? How is your process like? How's that experience like to your interview process and your hiring process, just briefly?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I want to stress, we use data as a way to help our hiring managers make decisions. Data does not make decisions. If data make decisions, we don't need hiring managers. We just need robots. Okay, so talent analytics for us at Spokeo is not a decision maker. They're just a tool to help assist decision making. Okay, so I just want to clarify that a little bit. But for our process, it's quite typical, right? It goes with application, and then the recruiter screen, and then we actually have 2 phone screens, right? And then in-person interview. Now it's not in person, it's video interview, right? And then basically offer. So that's basically the stage. Is actually quite typical. What's a little bit different for us is that, generally speaking, for our video interviews, we have 5 to 8 panels. And as I mentioned, those 5 to 8 panels are actually built on top of the LinkedIn skills analysis. Okay, so when we look at a job rec, right, we actually look at all the skills and all that stuff, we cluster them and so on and so on. So it's actually, the panel is actually built that way. So different panels will actually ask different questions and focus on different things. And we always tell our candidates that we're not looking for someone who aced all the panel, because to be very honest, that's not possible, right? But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to find out your problem solving abilities, and also trying to figure out what your strengths and weaknesses, so that we can know how you fit into our team. Because at the end of the day, there's no bad candidate, there's only bad fit.
And a follow-up question to that: how do you make teams work, right? A lot of times people think like they can just put a couple people together, a few people together, but what is the glue that you say you use to make sure that there is a team, that there is collaboration, there is trust, there's data? Is there any advice you can give someone how to create these teams that work together?
That's a very good question. And I think the first thing I want to talk about, because at Spokeo, we're a data company, so we really care about definitions. And when you're asking how does the team work, we really need to answer, what does work mean? Okay, so in that context, we need to really have a very clear, using OKR framework, very clear objective and key results. Right? And key results oftentimes are actually reflected in key performance indicators, KPIs. And you need to have very, very clear OKRs. Right? And OKRs is not just one thing. It has different levels and different scope. So you need to clarify those things so that you actually know what work means. What is the definition of done? So first thing first, you gotta do that, okay? And then, so we don't do this we do a little bit of this right now at Spokeo, but on the data side, the technical term is called product data. All right, I didn't invent this. It's a little bit confusing. It's not data product, it's called product data. And what product data is, the data or metadata generated via the product development process. Okay, so an example of product data can be number of code commits, right? The size of commits using the computer science, like software development example. So those are the kind of product data that we can use to analyze, is this team actually doing well, right? Jira has something called velocity. Is this team's sprint, right? The velocity in each agile scrum sprints, is the velocity good, or is it having some issues? So those kind of product data can help us really assess, is this team doing well or not? Now, at the end of the day, I do want to stress, these are just data, but people are not data. So how does a team work well? At the end of the day, it's about a culture of tolerance and respect, right? And it's also about what kind of leaders do you have for that particular team?
Yeah, actually, that was my last question, is about the culture, right? Of course, data is a leading factor in your culture, but can you explain what the culture feels like when, you know, in Spokeo, what you would like everyone to experience working under your company?
Yeah, so Spokeo's brand, okay, the mission, and by the way, mission is different from vision and strategy. Mission is about why, strategy is about how, and vision is about what. So Spokeo's mission is help make the world around us more transparent. And transparency takes on different levels. The first level is just informational transparency. So informational transparency is just like, hey, me sharing our financial numbers, good or bad, right, on the regular cadence, every single week, every single month, nothing to hide. Those are just informational transparencies, and we do that today. The next level, I think we're doing okay, but still rooms for improvement. It's called contextual transparency. So contextual transparency is a level beyond just information, right? Because knowing that your average tenure is 3 years, that's nice. But then without a context, right? Well, what's the industry average, or what's your goal? Like, you can't really make decisions on top of it, right? Are you okay with that number, or do you still need to improve? So that's what we call contextual transparency. How do we explain the why so that we empower our teammates to make decisions better, right? And then there's cultural transparency, philosophical transparency, and so on and so on. But ultimately, to explain Spokeo and describe Spokeo's culture, there's only one key takeaway. It's about transparency. And everything else, whether it's respect, right, whether it's caring, and all that sub-dimensions, all ladders up to that.
Great, thank you. Last question for me is, you spoke a little about empowering. I think that's a very important word. You empower an individual, you empower the team, and ultimately your whole company is empowered. How do you help one of your teammates grow, right? Maybe you help a designer grow into a better designer, into a product designer, into a marketing manager. How do you help your teammates grow?
That's a very, very good question, and very deep question. And I want to answer and address what you should not do first, because that's quite what I found often. What you should not do, right, when you want to empower someone, is to yell at someone or blame someone when there's a mistake, okay? By the way, one of the things I learned, and there's psychological studies on this, is that you can compliment someone like every single day, and then you yell at them once, and then it's over. People remember that negative moment a lot more than those positive reinforcements. So when you want to foster innovation, when you say it's okay to fail, the most important thing is to remind yourself not to get angry or mad when something doesn't work, because that moment of difficulty is what people remember. People don't remember you did all these things. People just remember you didn't do that at that moment in time. So that's what you shouldn't do, okay? Now, how do you empower someone to succeed, right? I talk about having a very clear, because at the end of the day, at Spokeo, we have a flexible work, philosophy and things like that, performance-driven philosophy. A lot of companies do that too. And in today's world, where everything is remote, no, you can't really breathe down people's neck, even if you want to anyway. So, so the real empowerment needs to come from having very clear guardrails, having very clear objectives, having a very good data-driven management, right? So that, hey, you tell people like, hey, these are the OKRs, these are the metrics, right? How do we calibrate it on a continual basis so that we can continuously improve? At the end of the day, what I think is that's the key thing to empowerment is this kind of data-driven management. And that this kind of data-driven management is becoming more and more increasingly important because the work environment, the future of work has fundamentally changed.
Great, thank you for those answers. And I think with that, we will wrap that up. Thank you for joining DataCon LA today. This is our last session. And thank you, Harrison Tang, for your presentation. And I appreciate all the attendees for the questions and interactions during this session. Please contact the speaker if you have further questions regarding this topic. Please provide your comment and feedback to us or the organizers on the community board or start a discussion there to connect with others in the DataCon LA 2020 community. Thank you for joining today's presentation, and I hope you can gain some insights from the session. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for being part of this year's DataCon LA. Thank you, Harrison.
Thanks a lot.